Welcome to the Sonoma Valley Groundwater Sustainability Agency community meeting. We're going to get started in just a few minutes. We realize it's 5:30, but we'll give a minute or two for additional people to join.
Bienvenidos a la Junta al webinario de sostenibilidad y de la agua terrenal. Vamos a darle tiempo a más gente que entre a la Junta y luego vamos a empezar. Aquí está la selección de cómo funcionarla para si quieren escuchar la Junta en español. Yo voy a estar interpretando en otro canal. Para entrar, nomás todo lo que tiene que hacer es hacerle clic abajo a la barra de abajo de la pantalla. Cuando salga el globito que sale, pueden hacerle clic al globito y le va a dar la opción de español o inglés. Nomás hágale clic a donde dice Spanish y eso lo va a llevar a un canal que me van a poner a mí en ese canal y yo voy a estar interpretando todo cuando ellos estén hablando. Ojalá y ahí los miro. Gracias.
Gracias. Welcome to the Sonoma Valley Groundwater Sustainability Agency community meeting. We're going to get started in just a couple of minutes, so please abide with us for just a moment. Thank you. We'll get started in just a minute. Sorry to be just running a few minutes late, but we'll be kicking this meeting off in just a minute. Again, if you're not hearing anything, we haven't started yet, but we will be starting in just a minute. So please bear with us. Thank you. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and get started. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the Sonoma Valley Groundwater Sustainability Agency community meeting. And you see before you the agenda, which I will cover. The purpose of the meeting is a rate and fee study update, and I'll be guiding you through this meeting. My name is Tim Parker, and I'll be your facilitator. After we go over the agenda, then we'll have a welcome and background information provided. We'll hear a presentation on the groundwater basin conditions, the projects proposed, and the budget associated with the projects. And then we'll get a presentation on the fee and rate study update, along with the next steps. And finally, we'll hear some closing remarks. Just want to go over quickly the webinar protocols. All users are muted. You can post questions in the Q&A as follows. Tap Ask a Question, enter the question into the Q&A box, and tap the Send button. Some questions will be answered verbally and others will be answered in writing real time. We have staff that are going to be reviewing the questions, so they'll be providing answers as they can during the discussion. Just a reminder that we do have a Spanish interpreter, and there's directions in Spanish on this slide, and we'll also go briefly over, we'll briefly show a Spanish slide as well. And here are instructions for accessing the Spanish interpreter during the discussion. It's real time. And now it's my pleasure to introduce GSA, Sonoma Valley Groundwater Sustainability Board Chair, Susan Gorn, who's also a Sonoma County Supervisor and has served on the GSA board since 2017 and has also been chair since 2017. So welcome, Susan. It's all yours.
Thank you, Tim. I really want to thank everybody for being with us this evening. I believe this is our second community meeting. Very important information will be presented tonight. This is a topic that you will want to pay attention to. I also need to thank our advisory board members and also all of my fellow board members from the various agencies that are represented on the GSA board. And so once again, thank you so much. And just a reminder, I am here tonight as a representative of the Sonoma Valley GSA board to help answer questions and receive your comments. And as I said before, tonight is the second community meeting, and we hope that you inform others on about the information available for this meeting. I believe it will be archived. And about 70 people attended the last meeting. They provided more than many good questions and comments, which we responded to that night or in the Q&A documents following that meeting. And those questions and answers are all posted on the GSA website. So your feedback is vitally important. It informs the board, the advisory committee, the administrator, and certainly our technical folks working with all of us on the plan and the implementation going forward. Thank you, Tim, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you this evening. Oh, well, let me just say also, we first want to spend a little time discussing why we are even considering a groundwater fee. And just as a reminder, in 2014, the state passed the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, or SGMA, which requires local management of groundwater. Sonoma Valley was one of 3 basins in Sonoma County that was designated a medium priority and now a high priority for this action moving forward. The purpose of SGMA, of course, is to ensure the groundwater basins throughout the state don't suffer the same types of programs as the San Joaquin Valley. As you know, you've been seeing the signs over years of their subsidence. This photo is showing that because of overpumping of groundwater, the land surface in the San Joaquin Valley actually subsided or sunk by more than 6 feet between 1988 and 2016. With the passage of SGMA, California joined all of the other Western states in managing the groundwater. This is a shared resource for all of us, one water, groundwater, as well as surface water. So thank you for paying attention, vitally important, especially this year during our third most severe drought year to date. Thank you. And Tim, I believe I may have some more messages. I keep trying to hand it over to you, but there's more information. In compliance with SGMA, the Sonoma Valley Groundwater Sustainability Agency, or GSA, was created in 2017. The decision-making board is comprised of elected or appointed officials. In addition, the basin has an advisory committee that provides stakeholder feedback and input to staff. Together, the board and advisory committee represent a broad swath of interests, including rural residential well owners, agriculture, business, environmental interests, and water suppliers. The county and the cities, towns, and special districts in the Sonoma Valley have supported the GSA for the first 5 years. This has been matched by state grants and technical assistance of more than $2 million. This funding has paid for a groundwater sustainability plan. It's allowed us to operate the new groundwater agency and to hold more than 50 board and advisory committee meetings and several workshops and community meetings, all of which have been open to you, our community. So tonight we'll discuss the fee options and the recent feedback from the GSA board. At our April meeting, the board agreed to slow down the process to allow more time to develop a new option to see where we stand with grant funding and to allow for additional feedback from the public. We've asked our staff to bring back to our May meeting a reduced budget for next year, so we can possibly get by with some money we have saved and possibly through additional contributions from the member agencies. I'm currently attending a meeting with the governor's wildfire task force. Actually, I did that this afternoon. And so I have to, I will still be with you this evening, but please know the integration of wildfire, resilience, drought, all play a role in the life of Sonoma Valley. And finally, our facilitator, Tim Parker, will introduce our next speaker. So thank you, Tim.
Thanks, Susan. And our next speaker is Sonoma Water's principal hydrogeologist, Marcus Trotta, who will talk to us about groundwater basin conditions, projects, and budget. So it's all yours, Marcus.
Okay, great. Thank you, Tim. And thank you all for joining this evening to hear this important information and hopefully provide us some input. So I am, as Tim mentioned, going to give a really high-level overview of kind of the groundwater conditions in the Sonoma Valley Basin, and discuss the implementation of the Groundwater Sustainability Plan and budget associated with that. So just starting out, as Chair Gordon noted, here in Sonoma County, as this new law was passed by the state back in 2014, the state also determined that in Sonoma County we have a total of 3 groundwater basins that are high enough priority, that's medium or high priority basins, defined by the state, that are required to comply with the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. And that includes the Sonoma Valley Basin, which we'll be talking about tonight. If basins are not locally managed, the state will intervene and begin charging well owners until locals are able to comply with themselves and do the work that's required by SGMA. Local management essentially means identifying, monitoring, and fixing any existing groundwater problems that are caused by groundwater pumping in the jurisdiction of the Groundwater Sustainability Agency, as well as preventing future problems and projecting out to see what those future problems might be, as I'll describe in a little more detail. If you go to the next slide, please. Oh, we don't have the map. Well, the website for the Groundwater Sustainability Agency has a map that you can go to and punch in your property address to determine whether or not you're in the basin or not. So that's a resource that's available on the Groundwater Sustainability Agency's website, which is the URL is on the bottom of each of these slides. So the information I'm sharing tonight, again, is at a very high level, is applied in detail in the Groundwater Sustainability Plan, which can also be found on the website for the GSA. It's a very highly technical document with lots of information and details. It does include I think a pretty good summary of the overall content of the plan, and an executive summary if you wanted to get a shorter Reader's Digest version of the content of the plan and what is proposed for implementation as part of the plan. The plan itself was developed over several years, as Chair Gordon noted, and included feedback from the GSA board, the public, as well as an advisory committee, which includes representatives of rural well owners, environmental interests, business interests, agriculture, as well as local agencies. in that all was done through more than 50 public meetings over the course of the development of the plan. So SGMA, Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, requires that the GSAs look at kind of specific measures of sustainability or sustainability indicators, which are indicated on this slide here, determine whether there are problems or not within the groundwater basins. So there's 6 indicators that are required. They include water quality degradation, the potential for land surface subsidence, surface water depletion due to groundwater pumping, seawater intrusion, reduction in chronic lowering of groundwater levels, and reduction of groundwater and storage. So the Groundwater Sustainability Plans evaluates the known and current conditions of all of those 6 sustainability indicators. And the plan is also required to set criteria, thresholds, minimum thresholds, and measurable objectives for each of these sustainability indicators that must be that are set in order to be protective of beneficial uses and users of groundwater within the basin. And that includes domestic well users, as well as aquatic ecosystems that may be benefiting from groundwater discharging to our surface water sources in the basin. So the plan details the procedures and process that was used and the data behind the setting of all those thresholds that really drive the implementation of the GSP. So if there are problems now, or if they are likely to occur as the climate and land uses change, and the plan needs to project out 50 years into the future. So it includes projections of future climate as well as land use changes. If those problems are likely to occur, the GSA must identify how to correct those or prevent them from occurring. So I'm going to just walk through each of these indicators really quick and just give you a synopsis of kind of their general condition. For water quality degradation, which is generally acceptable throughout the basin, although there are certainly localized issues due to natural geologic conditions and other land use practices. But in general, basin-wide, groundwater quality is pretty good. And SGMA really requires that the GSAs essentially do no harm to water quality through their implementation of the GSP, whether it's projects and actions or inactions that cause groundwater levels to lower and cause water quality problems. For land surface subsidence, this is something like the photo that Chair Gorin shared in the southern San Joaquin Valley of the Central Valley, where subsidence due to groundwater pumping is damaging infrastructure. Fortunately, here in our basin, we don't see any evidence of land surface subsidence due to groundwater pumping. However, for both of these indicators, and all 6 of them really, SGMA also requires that each one of these indicators have a monitoring network that's described in the GSP, and that there are plans to continue monitoring and tracking each of these 6 sustainability indicators during implementation of the plan. For the impacts of groundwater pumping on streams and surface water sources within the basin, like many GSAs throughout the state, we have a lot of information and data gaps related to this particular sustainability indicator. The plan does include some initial minimum thresholds and measurable objectives. However, the plan also includes and prioritizes the collection of data to improve information on this particular sustainability indicator. Similarly, with potential for seawater intrusion or brackish water, from the tidal marshlands at the southern portions of the basin, we are also really lacking detailed information on groundwater quality along that interface between freshwater and the brackish water. And so the plan includes studies to do some voluntary water quality monitoring, and then improve our monitoring network through installation of monitoring wells, or working with landowners that have appropriate wells that could be volunteered for water quality monitoring to better track the potential for seawater intrusion, because with lowering of groundwater levels, you can have seawater intrusion moving into your basin. That can be a serious problem. For these other two sustainability indicators, the chronic lowering of groundwater levels, these are identified and flagged as more areas of concern for the Sonoma Valley subbasin. In particular, the chronic lowering of groundwater levels is something that we do observe. There has been some long-term, over several decades in some cases, lowering of declines in groundwater levels, primarily in the deep aquifer system, which is defined as being below 200 feet below ground surface. Generally, the shallow aquifer system is above 200 feet, and the deeper aquifer system is below 200 feet. And in wells that have been monitored over time, and we do have some good records of monitoring in this basin due to voluntary monitoring programs that were implemented as part of prior groundwater planning and studies that was done on a voluntary basis. We do see those declining groundwater levels primarily in the southeastern portions of the basin, southeast of the city of Sonoma, as well as in the El Verano area. And connected with those declining groundwater levels, we also observe declines in groundwater storage, which is also something that needs to be monitored and then corrected over time. And SGMA allows for the GSAs 20 years from submittal of the plan to achieve their sustainability goal and achieve sustainable conditions within the basin. So, for all these indicators, in addition to the continued monitoring, really to address the groundwater levels and storage declines, the GSA must also develop projects or actions to address those declining groundwater levels and prevent problems from getting worse. Next slide, please. So, detailed descriptions of the projects that are needed to correct and prevent those groundwater level declines are provided in the groundwater sustainability plan. And really, there's generally two primary ways to reverse and correct groundwater level declines from occurring. It's either to reduce your usage or increase your supplies. In the GSP that was submitted, there's a mix of both of those types of strategies included. So it includes voluntary water use efficiency and alternate water source projects that have been successful in urban areas where there's been funding for conservation programs that have resulted in a 37% reduction in per capita water use for the region since 2009. There's pursuit of increased opportunity for expanding recycled water deliveries and storage within the basin to offset groundwater pumping. Recycled water that's generated on 8th Street East at wastewater treatment plant is treated to tertiary standards and has been used for decades for landscape and vineyard irrigation, and has been successful in offsetting groundwater use. So continuing that and looking for opportunities to expand that use is another project. Aquifer storage and recovery, or also known as groundwater banking. That concept involves taking advantage of wintertime water from the Russian River system, which is imported into the basin already through an aqueduct by Sonoma Water and delivered to the city of Sonoma and Valley of the Moon Water District. We have water that's available in the wintertime that generally is just going out to the ocean. Even in drier years and drought years, there's some water that's available that could be used to recharge into our groundwater basin and store, help recover groundwater levels and reduce again the need for native groundwater pumping. So we actually did a pilot study for this in collaboration with the city of Sonoma back in 2018. And so the plan includes building on that pilot study, to advance that strategy here in Sonoma Valley. And I will note that the Valley Lagoon Water District actually just got a grant from the Department of Water Resources to move forward with aquifer storage and recovery within their service area. Other type of recharge that's included is stormwater capture recharge. That's taking advantage again of wintertime flows, in this case, stormwater from our local creeks and streams, and spreading it out in areas in the basin where we have permeable sediments, where it can recharge and infiltrate and recharge our groundwater basin to increase our supplies. The plan also includes a list of potential policy options that would be prioritized and brought to the GSA board for consideration of adopting. The SGMA does provide the Groundwater Sustainability Agency with a number of authorities that it could implement. So some of those could include, doing mandatory demand reduction, requiring metering for certain types of users. It's important to know that SGMA does not authorize the GSA to require metering of what are known as de minimis users, and that's your typical rural residential homeowner that's just using water for their home and garden. They would not be able to require metering, but they could require metering for other commercial types of uses or agricultural purposes. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we have this mix of projects and management actions. So during the early years of implementing the plan, the implementation plan includes funding for advancing some of the planning and studies that are needed to really fully assess the feasibility and of these different programs, so that the GSA board can make an informed decisions on prioritizing which strategies to invest in, and because the GSA would not want to spend money on projects that actually don't benefit the basin. This slide just shows an example of the type of planning needed for one certain type of project. This would be an on-farm recharge project, again, basically capturing local stormwater for creeks and streams and flooding vineyards. This is something that's done in the Central Valley. There's been a lot of activity there and pilot projects. There's actually been pilot project in Santa Rosa area and one planned for Alexander Valley. But there's a lot of information that's needed to support the planning for those projects. How permeable are the soils? Do you have growers who are interested in doing those projects? And is there water available, during those creeks and streams that could be spread on those fields? What are the benefits of those projects? Can it benefit areas that are being impacted by surface water depletion? Permitting is another major step that needs to happen with these types of projects. And then also on the farming side, making sure that the flooding of those fields does not impact their vines and crops. So that's just an example of some of the types of planning that's needed. Next slide. So in addition to the projects and management actions I just described, the GSA must comply with SGMA by doing all the monitoring I mentioned. Annual reporting is required. We just submitted our first annual report for the GSA back in April. It's on the GSA's website also. Closing data gaps is a major area of focus for the first 5 years of implementation, as well as continuing to find the numerical computer model that's used to project future conditions and estimate the water budget for the basin. In addition, because in particular of the importance of resolving data gaps related to surface water depletion, coordination with resource agencies that have expertise in fisheries and other areas is also included in the implementation of the GSP. 5-year update is also required of the GSP in addition to that annual reporting, and of course, community engagement and ongoing outreach to the community is going to be key to the success of implementing the GSP. As you can see on the slide, some of the tasks are one-time items, but others occur annually or are ongoing. Next slide. So the total budget that is projected to implement the groundwater sustainability plan, do the planning for those projects and management actions, administer the groundwater sustainability plan, work on closing those data gaps, the required monitoring. Our estimate is that on average, the total cost would be around $1.1 million per year. The budget does assume that the Santa Rosa Plain GSA, Sonoma Valley GSA, and Petaluma Valley GSAs will all jointly share the costs of studies, projects, outreach, and such where at all possible. The budget will fluctuate over those 5-year periods. Some years it'll be less and some years it'll be higher. As in Jerry Bradshaw, your next presenter, will talk a little bit more about the budget. But I did also want to note that, as Chair Gorin noted, during the last GSA board meeting, staff was given direction to really look at this first year budget and do what we can to bring the cost down for this first year as we're getting started and sorting out the funding, the long-term funding sources for the GSA. And so that is something we'll be working on and bringing back to the board for consideration, along with an evaluation of what the impacts of making some of those cuts or deferments to some of these activities would be. So that's ongoing work. Slowing down also would give us time to evaluate potential grant funding opportunities. There's grant funding opportunities, as I think Jerry will describe, that we'll be looking to hopefully take advantage of later this year, and we won't know until early next year whether and to what extent the GSA is successful on that. Next slide. So, one of the things wanted to try and make clear are what are the actual benefits to groundwater users in the basin through implementing this groundwater sustainability plan. Because the heart of the plan are those sustainable management criteria, and those minimum thresholds are set to be protective of the depths of shallow wells near where we're monitoring. So in that way, we get indications as to whether there's a potential for groundwater users' wells to go dry, and that's something that the GSA needs to avoid. So that's a benefit by having that early warning should something like that be a risk. Retaining local control of the groundwater basin, avoiding the state coming in and taking over and charging fees is an obvious benefit. Looking out and protecting and building some resiliency into the groundwater basin to address long-term impacts of climate change and changing land use patterns. Again, developing better data to assess the risk of seawater intrusion, and if found to be an actual risk, developing projects to limit that from happening, reducing the chances of land subsidence, and then again, as we develop more information on the interaction between groundwater and streams, helping support ecosystems within the basin. Next slide. So, we do acknowledge there are many challenges associated with the fee study and implementing the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act here in Sonoma County and in this basin in particular. And Jerry will be, I think a lot of these will become more obvious as Jerry Bradshaw goes through his presentation next. But I just wanted to, highlight that, the water use estimates that are being used for the fee study, that all these estimates are imperfect, as Jerry will describe. we really only have actual measured and metered data from a small subset of users in the basin, the public water supply system. So the other uses need to be estimated. And this is very common throughout the state right now. Almost all GSAs are going through this struggle. And then, in order to get metered data, having a comprehensive metering program, because, de minimis users are not allowed to be metered, wouldn't be feasible and is also likely to be very, very costly, although it is something that the GSA board could consider for certain users. So we're essentially using, the best available data and methods that we have. And the refinement of the water use estimates that Jerry is going to describe is going to be continuous, and there are plans and projects within the GSP itself to improve those estimates over time. Next slide. And then obviously these are our new costs to groundwater users. So explaining why it's needed and what the benefits are is really important. It's also another challenge is that because the DWR's regulations and complying with all those requirements does result in significant operational administrative costs that are not necessarily scalable based on basin size or significance of issues in each basin. And so that's something that's a challenge. And so smaller basins can bear a greater proportion of these costs than larger basins where the costs can be spread out over more groundwater users. And then, as Jerry will describe, the timing, if we were to get this fee study in place this year, would need to be completed by late June or early July in order to reach a deadline of including the fee on a property tax roll to fund the first year of implementation. And again, we won't know about the state grant awards until early 2023. And there's also potential for county funding to help to fund portions of the implementation that will be discussed as part of the Board of Supervisors budget hearings in June. And so that information won't be known until another month or so. And so these are some of the challenges that we wanted to convey to all of you and make sure you're aware of. And again, Jerry will be providing a lot more information on all of that. So next slide. I think that was my last slide. Yeah, so I'm happy to answer any questions related to what I provided, and just a reminder that Jerry will be getting into a lot more detail on the water use estimates as well as the fee study itself. Back to you, Tim, I think.
Yep. All right. Thank you, Marcus. So we do have a question or two that came up, and maybe I can paraphrase the first one for you there regarding the ASR projects. Could you talk a little bit about the source of the water and the requirements for the ASR? There's a question regarding the groundwater pumped from the aqueduct. So maybe just explain a little bit about what the source of the water is and why.
Yeah, so the Valley of the Moon project that they are getting, they've been awarded for is to retrofit one of their wells within the basin and another well just outside the basin so that it could be used for aquifer storage and recovery to do the recharge portion of the work. And it would be utilizing, again, wintertime, springtime water from the aqueduct, from the Russian River aqueduct. I'm not sure if there's another portion of that question.
No, I think it's just related to the replenishment pumped with aqueduct water.
Okay.
And, yeah.
And I will say that this technology has been used throughout the state, throughout the country, throughout the world, and we do have quite a bit of information that's led up to looking at those types of projects. A regional feasibility study was done back in 2013 that looked regionally at the availability of source water from the Russian River. Did some initial looking at what happens when you mix these two types of water, the surface water from the Russian River and our native groundwater. And then, as I mentioned, we also did a pilot study within this basin with the city of Sonoma and closely evaluated under a permit with the Regional Water Quality Control Board, the effects of the recharge project and determined that it could be successfully implemented here in Sonoma Valley.
Okay, thanks, Marcus. We've got a couple of other questions, but it seems to me they might be better to answer after we've had a chance for Jerry to go through the rate and fee study, because they kind of touch on costs and how to manage costs. So with that, I want to thank you, Marcus, and introduce Jerry Bradshaw. He's a senior engineer with SEI Consulting Group, and he's going to explain the details of the ongoing fee and rate study. So it's all yours, Jerry.
Thank you, Tim. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks for having me on. I get down to the financial side of things and in my fee and rate study. And I'm going to cover four main topics here in the next few minutes. One would be just the funding sources. What are our options on funding sources? Groundwater pumping data, since some of the options for a fee structure would rely on how much water different properties are using. We'll go into how we develop that data. We'll revisit the costs that Marcus already mentioned and do some variations on that. And then we'll wrap up with some preliminary options and the rates that go with those options. And then we'll wrap it up and do a summary. Next slide, please. So in background, and this is somewhat repetitive, but I'm going to take it from a bit of a financial side of things. The existing funding structure was scaled for development of the plan. That was funded by grants and member agency contributions to the tune of about a little over $750,000 per year. But this whole funding structure will expire this fiscal year now that the GSP has been developed. And we're heading into the next phase, which is implementation of the plan. And we've determined that the revenue requirement increases to a little over $1 million per year in order to pursue implementation of this. And that's an average over the next 5 years. It does fluctuate from year to year, but that is the average. And we would be using an average to determine some rates so that the rates are steady from year to year. And to do all this, it requires a new rate and fee study, which we're well into now in presenting some of our findings to you here. On the next slide, we'll kind of wrap up what has gone before. This is the prior funding scheme. You see all the different partners. These are members of the JPA, or the agency. And you can see that the total funding over these last 5 years has been almost $4 million in that middle column. But if you look at the top, more than half of that has come from grants. And you see that that breaks out to about $400,000 a year spread over those 5 years. And the total is about $780,000 per year to run this. It was a little shorter in the first few years and it got much bigger in the last few years as the plan was developed. But keep in mind those grants, which were almost 60% of the funding for the last 5 years, are exhausted now. Now we have every opportunity to apply for more grants. There are new grant cycles coming up in the fall, and the agency is determined to apply for every grant that is offered and has some confidence that we can get some or maybe all of the grants we apply for. So that's it on what's gone before. Let's look forward now. On the next slide, this gives us an idea what the different funding sources are. I've broken them into 3 main categories. And the first one is grants, which we talked about just a moment ago, is how we got through the last 5 years. The grants come from the state, typically, and ultimately they're paid for by taxpayers through these bond programs that people vote on. So that's who ultimately pays for the state grants that come through. The next option is for the GSA members to fund whatever's left over after grants come in. And we've broken those into two groups, the water agencies and cities, which have their own water customers. So if they contribute money to run this agency, they would probably turn around and pass that through to all their water customers and to help fund that. But the county and the conservation district don't have customers to turn it to. So if they were to fund some of this, they'd have to just eat those costs through cutting back on other services. The last group are the beneficiaries of groundwater, which are basically the property owners and the cities that use the groundwater for beneficial use. And we've broken that into two categories: groundwater users that are directly dependent on groundwater, and then all water consumers in the basin that are somewhat dependent on groundwater, because to the extent that the Russian River water satisfies their needs, they don't have to pump out of the basin. But at times when the Russian River water is not enough, they will have to turn those pumps on. So all of those city customers and Valley of the Moon customers are somewhat dependent on groundwater too. So we'll take a look at including all the parcels in the basin too as we go through and examine what these options mean. On the next slide, we talk about the well owner metrics, and this is the metrics for developing a pumping-based fee structure. So on the first chunk of this, we look at different rate classes. We have the municipal and other public service providers as one group. We have agricultural and other irrigation, such as turf irrigation for schools and golf courses. We have rural residential, and there's a lot of those out there. We have a few commercial ventures, and we also have some urban wells. Urban wells is different from the other four categories because those are wells that are on properties that are inside a water district, the city of Sonoma or Valley of the Moon Water District. But they're known or thought to be used for outside watering. So we do assign a very small amount to those when we know them. It doesn't make up very much of the pie, but the other four are for parcels that are outside of the city and Valley of the Moon districts. On the next paragraph, we see how we derive these pumping numbers from these different groups. The first one, the municipal and other public service providers, actually keep track of all the water they pump out of the aquifer, and they are required to report that to the State Department of Drinking Water. And we have access to that. So we have actual data, and we've gone back to 2013 to look at the data, the trends, and the averaging, and we have actual data for those entities. But all the rest of these are private entities: agricultural, rural, residential, commercial, and so forth. And we don't have access to the pumping information. In fact, many of them don't have meters on the wells, and they don't actually know necessarily how much they pump. And when they do, they're probably not too eager to share it with a governmental agency. So for those, we have to estimate the pumping, and we have a pretty rigorous and thorough way to do that. And we'll take a look at that in a moment. But first, on the next slide, I want to show how these different rate classes factor into the pie chart of all the pumping. The two blue sections are the public systems. The dark blue is for the large public systems, which in this case is the city of Sonoma and Valley of the Moon Water District. Then we have a lot of small mutual companies and other shared public systems that make up another 8% in aggregate. Then, of course, the two green sections are irrigation. The dark green is agriculture, which by itself is almost 2/3 of the pie. And then when you add in the turf, you come up to almost 70% of all pumping attributed to irrigation. The rural residential is a smaller piece. I mean, it's still substantial at 13%. That's because there's a lot of rural residences out there. And then the commercial and the urban irrigation make up the last 4% put together. So that's a visual of how it breaks out. I want to point out that the two blue sections are the only sections that we have metered data on. So that's 13% of all the water is metered actual data. The other rest of the pie has to be estimated. So that's what, 87% if I'm doing my math right. So there's a lot of estimating to do. So we need to be careful and thorough as we do that. So let's talk a little bit about how we do that on the next slide. We base most of the pumping based on what water is demanded from each parcel based on the land use. So the agriculture and other irrigation, we have good information from the state on what types of crops are out there and how many acres they cover. We also have some good industry information on how much water each type of crop requires in order to be healthy in this climate in Sonoma County. And we'll give you some examples in a minute. So from that, we can derive how much water is required for each acre of each type of crop. The rural residential, we based that on various studies and checked it against local data with both some of the rural residences through the mutual water companies, as well as the local municipal and local water district data. And then commercial and urban wells, that varies by land use. We have a very extensive list of land use categories in the area, and we assign an assumed value for each one. And as I said, those two combined only make up the last 4%. On the lower half of this slide, we'll give you some examples. First one is 50 acres of vineyard. And the application rate for a vineyard is assumed to be 0.6 feet per year. Now let me pause for a minute and explain what that means. In Sonoma County, we get 20 to 25 inches of rain per year. That's how many inches come out of the sky on a typical year. 0.6 feet is equal to about 7 inches. So a vineyard requires an additional 7 inches of water over the course of a year to keep it healthy and thriving. So if we multiply 50 acres times 0.6 feet per year, we get 30 acre feet. And an acre foot is the amount of water it takes to cover 1 acre, 1 foot deep. So it's equivalent to some 325,000 gallons. It's just a very big number boiled down to a simple metric of acre feet. 100 acres of pasture, the rate there is 0.04 feet per year, which is about a ½ inch of water per year. Most pastures aren't irrigated, but the livestock that graze in them require a little bit of water. So it is a very small amount, but we do assign that small amount. So 100 acres, which is a pretty big size of pasture, would require 4 acre feet per year to sustain. 100 acres of grain is considered dry farming, so that works out to 0 acre feet per year. So no water is assigned to grain farms. And then the rural residential, which I talked about before, is assumed to use a ½ of an acre foot per year. I also want to point out that the credit, we have a lot of parcels in this basin as well as the other basins in the county that rely on surface water or recycled water for their farming or their other irrigation needs. And we have some pretty good records on that, and we're applying that on a parcel by parcel basis to offset. For instance, that 50 acre vineyard that requires 30 acre feet per year, if they're using 20 acre feet of surface water, that means they only need to pull 10 acre feet out of the aquifer. And that 10 acre feet is what they would be, the value used to assess the fee on that parcel. So that's an example of how we do use surface and recycled water credits in this system. So I'm going to show you on the next slide the numbers that make up that pie chart I showed you a few minutes ago. There's all the same categories there. We're showing a range because we're still tinkering with our estimates, although it's getting very close to the end. We just have a few of these categories that we're still tinkering with. But you can see at the bottom, the total acre feet ranges from 6,500 acre feet to about 8,500 acre feet per year. You'll see the offsets for alternate sources, that's recycled and surface water, is anywhere from 700 to 1,000 acre feet. So this basin uses a lot of alternate sources to cover their irrigation needs. I just want to mention that this estimate of 6,500 to 8,500 is higher than what the GSP estimated. It was estimating around I think 6,000 acre feet per year. So we're a little bit higher, which is not too surprising when we come at it from a completely different direction and do it on a parcel by parcel basis, which is what's required if we're going to charge each parcel some sort of fee at the end of the day. So that's what we're preparing for, is for the board to be able to consider any kind of fee structures, what each parcel would require. So we did come up with a little bit higher amount. Of course, we've also refined the modeling efforts for water use and so forth from a year ago when they were developing the model for the GSP, the plan. On the next slide, we'll talk about the budget. The budget, as noted before, was a little over $1 million per year, and that's on an average. Some years are as low as 600,000, and some years are up towards $1.5 million. But this $1.1 million per year would fund that over the 5 years in a cash flow basis would be pretty healthy. The board has given us direction to allow 25% of that budget to come from grants. Now that's a bit speculative because we don't know if we're going to get those grants, but we have some confidence. In fact, the analysis that staff did was that about 40% of the budget could come from grants. So they're kind of hedging their bet back from 40% and give us direction to assume 25% would come from grants. That leaves the 841,000, or 75%, is what's required to be generated locally through those sources I talked about before, the member agencies or the beneficiaries of groundwater. So we're going to show you some ranges of fees, and they're going to be based on these two numbers. The low number you see is based on a revenue of 841,000 a year, and the larger number you'll see in the upcoming scenarios is based on the $1.1 million per year. So keep those in mind as we go. I also want to mention, as we've mentioned several times before, the grants are just estimated at this point. They're not currently known whether or not we'll get those, but the board has given us direction to proceed in this manner. So let's take a look at some options. But before we do that, here's the basic formula. After we do all the estimating and all the budgeting, we've come up with the two basic components, which is the dollars required and how many acre feet you're going to spread that over. And the actual equation is very simple. So with the 25% grant funding, it would be $841,600 divided by, at this point, we're assuming 7,100 acre feet, which comes out to approximately $120 per acre foot per year. And the total budget's a similar calculation. It comes out to about $160 per acre foot. So this is an example of one of the options as we get into the next slide of the per acre foot fee that could be assessed. This is similar to what was adopted in the Santa Rosa Plain north of you in 2019, although they're paying it out of member sources at this point in time, but they're going to probably proceed with that, another version of that next year. So the first one is what we call a regulatory fee. This is the one we've been building up for you as we go through our examples. This would be paid by all groundwater pumpers, including cities and the farmers and businesses, rural residences, and other urban sites with wells. On the upside, it's very proportionate to the quantity of water pumped. So as we all work to try and preserve this common asset that everyone relies upon, the people who pump the most would pay the most, and there's an innate fairness to that. So this is our attempt to try and preserve that fairness as we go through this thing. It's already in place up in Santa Rosa Plain, as we mentioned, in 2019, and it does include credit for recycled and surface water with the data that we have. On the downside, the rates are quite high, and we recognize that. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through and tell you what the board is thinking as we move to the next step. And on the other downside is most private pumping is not metered, so we'll have to model or estimate how much water is used, as we showed you before. So the annual range is $120 to $160 per acre foot, and we realize that that's a pretty big bite. The next example, here's some examples on the per acre foot. The 50-acre vineyard that we talked about before would pay an annual fee of between $3,600 and $4,800. So that's a lot of money, even for a 50-acre vineyard. We understand that. The 100-acre pasture would be paying $480 to $640, and the rural residents at a half-acre foot would come in at $60 to $80 per year for those rural residences. The next example is what we've called a wellhead fee, and it's just a flat fee, the same for every parcel that relies on groundwater. So it's very simple to calculate. You just take the revenue required divided by all the properties, the 3,000 or so well parcels, and you come up with a range of $275 to $300 per year per parcel. So that would be the 50-acre vineyard. and the rural residents would pay the same. So on the downside, that's not very proportionate to the ground, to the amount of water that each property takes to run things. We do put down here at the bottom one more example, which is the state intervention fees. Nobody is suggesting we default to the state. I don't think anybody wants the state in here to run things. But if they did, they would come in with these two fees combined, a $300 per well fee plus $40 per acre foot. Now, while that seems actually affordable compared to the other rates you see above you, it comes with a lot of other stipulations. For instance, they would probably meter all the wells. They actually have the power to meter de minimis users, whereas the agency doesn't, but the state could very well do that and charge everyone on a per acre foot. So plus it's only a temporary reprieve until the agency can get on its own 2 feet and do its work itself. So a state intervention is not a permanent solution in any event. One last mention here is the wellhead fees has been discarded. Now that I've told you all about it, the board has decided that that's not worth pursuing any further. So we're going to drop it at this point under consideration. So that's option A, that would look at just to the 3,000 parcels that rely directly on well water. On the next slide, we look at option B, which are taxes or assessments that would apply to all 12,500 or so parcels in the basin. The first one is a parcel tax. Most property owners are familiar with these. They do require voter approval with a 2/3 supermajority vote. And as a tax, they don't have to be proportionate really to anything. In fact, there is some requirements for them to be uniform across different parcels. This is the lowest rate because it's spread to all 12,000 parcels in the basin, not just the 3,000 well parcels. But it's still coming out at $60 to $95 per parcel per year. And that's a very noticeable parcel tax and would be very difficult to get passed. Keep in mind that in order to get this on the ballot, it would have to wait until this coming November at the very earliest, and wouldn't be ready to generate revenue until the second year of this 5-year plan. So you still have to come up with a first-year interim plan for funding. Plus, the county charges money to put it on the ballot. Plus, you probably want to do some public opinion surveys to find out what the public thought about this before you went any further. So those costs we're estimating to be about $165,000 over and above the budget we talked about earlier. And that's built into the range of costs here, that's $60 to $95.
Hey, Jerry.
Yes.
Just a quick interjection. Sorry for interrupting you, but there was one question that would be helpful right now, and it's a question regarding, please define a well parcel. So there's make sure that people understand what you're saying when you say a parcel.
Yes, that's actually a great question and worthy of a little discussion. We have a lot of good data that we're using to estimate water usage, but one of the data sets we don't have good confidence in is where all the wells are. So what we're doing instead is modeling what each parcel demands in the shape of water. How much water does each parcel require to grow the crops or to have a home on it or to run a business? And we know that if you're not in a service area for the city or for the Valley of the Moon, then you must be relying on water. So we deduce that you are reliant on well water. That doesn't mean you absolutely have a well on your parcel, but you are connected to some sort of well, unless you're using surface or recycled water, which we have good data on. So we are modeling how much the water demand is. And when I say a well parcel, these are parcels that are reliant on well water to do the operation, either the home or the crops or the business on that parcel. Unfortunately, we don't have good data on where the wells are, what parcels they are on, and where that water goes. So we're doing it on a water demand model. So it is not a direct link, but we do use well parcels just as in the nomenclature. Hopefully that helps explain what we're talking about here.
Thanks, Jerry.
Sure. The next option in the option B family is a benefit assessment. This also requires voter approval, although it's a different kind of vote. It's landowners who vote, not registered voters. Only requires a 50% approval. It also has a cost to implement in the range of about $100,000. It also can't be implemented until year number 2. And Actually, we can take that last one out. It's no longer under legal review. We're confident that it would legally work. Although there's a lot of requirements for proportionality on this, and it would require a lot of detailed analysis that we haven't done yet. It's not really been part of the scope of our work at this point, but we know enough about it to estimate what those ranges would be. Because of the proportionality requirement, we would use the acre-foot usage of water again as the basis, and the rates there would be $90 to $115. So it's a little less than the regulatory fee we talked about a moment ago, but not markedly less. Here's some examples of what those 3 example parcels would be. The 50-acre vineyard would be $2,700 to $3,450. The 100-acre pasture would be $360 to $460, and the rural residence would be in the range of $45 to $58 per year. And at this point, those are still in play, even though they would require an extra year and voter approval. So those are a big ask. Those have a high bar to get over with the voter approval, but they're still being considered as a remote option at this point in time. On the next slide, we have a new option that we didn't include in our community meeting last month, and that's a hybrid. So this would touch all 12,500 parcels, but in 2 tiers. The first tier would be a user charge just to the groundwater or the well parcels, the 3,000 well parcels. And that would be about half as much as the regulatory fee we talked about earlier. It would range from $66 to $88 per acre foot. The other part of the charge would go to all 12,000 parcels on a flat rate per parcel of about between $32 and $43 per parcel. This is a structure that was used for a couple other basins, most notably in the South Sacramento area and the rural areas south of the city of Sacramento. And the way they split the budget into these 2 parts is to use the Department of Water Resources scoring criteria. They scored all of these basins, which gave you your designation of whether you were a medium or high priority basin. It is based on 8 criteria. So we divide those criteria into whether those, not all those criteria dealt directly with groundwater. Some of those, for instance, population and population growth is something that applies to all the parcels in the basin. So that's an example of how that would be divided into how much of it would be paid by all the parcels in a flat rate and how much it would be left for the groundwater extraction element. So this hybrid fee is very preliminary at this point, and it requires a lot more analysis because it's just been looked at for the last, I think, 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks at the most. And the examples of this, the 50-acre vineyard would be in the $2,000 to $2,600 range. The 100-acre pasture would be $296 to $395. The rural residence would be $65 to $87. And the urban parcel comes into play here at the $32 to $43 range. So that's something that the board just saw for the first time a few weeks ago, and it is being considered for further analysis. On the next slide, I've thrown a lot of numbers at you, so I just wanted to give you a summary of those numbers. And what we've done is we've just shown you the 50-acre vineyard at the low range, and the rural residential, and then the urban users who come into play on a few of the scenarios. So you can see the 50-acre vineyard, the regulatory fee is the highest amount. They would be having an annual fee of $3,600. The benefit assessment would be a little bit below that, $27,000, and the hybrid would be a little over $2,000. So you can see their rates do go down as you go through the options. The rural residents, other than the wellhead fee, which is no longer under consideration, they all hover between $45 and $65 per year. So there's not a lot of impact to the rural residential. But the urban users aren't included in the first 2, but they are included in those last 3 in varying rates ranging from $32 to $60. And the benefit assessment is actually, yeah, those are flat fees for a basic urban user. So that hopefully that gives you some summary of the different fees we talked about and the structures and how they stack up one against the other. On the next slide, I want to kind of summarize what the board, the direction we got from the GSA board a few weeks ago is. The first chunk talks about the timing, and this was mentioned earlier on. They want to slow down. They think that such high rates, and we acknowledge, I know I'm talking very easily about these, but we realize these are very high rates for everyone involved. They really deserve thorough consideration, and they felt that try and get this through in a couple of months was a pretty big ask. So they were asking us to slow down, which will probably take us beyond this fiscal year into next fiscal year. So the next portion is the budgets. They did ask us to take 25% off the budget, assuming that would come from grants. So that helped lower the fees a little bit. They want to consider member contributions for the first year. Part of the slow down regime would be, hey, what are we going to do this first year if we don't have a fee in place? So if they look to member contributions, that would buy them that extra year. But in order to do that, they want to really go take the costs down to bare bones minimum. And we've just started doing that analysis, and we'll hopefully have that done in a week or so in time to show it to the board. We're targeting maybe around $500,000 for that first year. The savings that we would accrue mostly would be work that still has to be done and just be done in a future year. There's a few items that we would cut, for instance, maybe fewer board meetings, fewer communications with you all in the public. Those are just services that would be lost. It wouldn't have to be made up in the future, but most of the savings now would have to be made up in the future. So we'd be treading water a little bit, knowing we still have to swim the distance, but we're going to tread water this first year to buy some time. And of course, as I mentioned, they no longer support the wellhead fee. It's just not proportional. But they did ask us to consider all of the other options going forward. So the next steps here are, it's a short timeline. Basically, we've started here in May with tonight's meeting. Next week, the advisory committee will meet next Tuesday. And then the board meeting meets again in about 2.5 weeks on May 23rd. And you're welcome to attend any of those. Those are public meetings. There is another board meeting coming up in June. So depending on what action the board takes in May, they may narrow their choices down a lot more and maybe could even take some action in June if they wanted to. But any action they take takes 2 meetings a month apart to adopt any kind of ordinance. So time is running very short to get anything adopted in time for the August deadline to have bills included with the property tax system. They could meet in July to have that second month, but that's quite a long shot at this point, at least as the way it looks from where I stand. Then, of course, we would go into next fiscal year. There are meetings every month coming up throughout the rest of this year. The next slide just sort of summarizes these meetings. Advisory committee next Tuesday, and then the next 2 board meetings on May 23rd and June 27th. The advisory committee is going to be a virtual meeting. The 2 board meetings is still determined whether those will be virtual or in person. So stay tuned if you're interested in attending, and check the website on that. So for my final slide, I just want to sum up everything you've heard over the last hour or so from Marcus and from myself and from Susan. On the left side talks about the Groundwater Sustainability Groundwater Management Act, or SGMA. Basically, it required local agencies to form up and for those agencies to define sustainability and then achieve sustainability. And we're just embarking on that second step there, achieve sustainability. In doing so, we've got these 6 bullet points here that Marcus talked at length about earlier, which is implement projects and actions, close data gaps to learn more about what actually happens out there with the physical environment and the water, and to monitor and report to the state what we've seen and start to discern how the water actually reacts, so we can update the model and then ultimately have an updated 5-year plan. Every 5 years, we need to update our plan as we learn more about what's going on. All of that work, and I hope you agree to some extent that there is value in all the work that the agency is doing to provide sustainability. This is a common resource that has up heretofore has had no oversight or management. Everyone's drawing the water that they think they need. And ultimately, it just needs some oversight and management in order to be sustainable. I think you're fortunate in this basin where the problems aren't as severe as they are elsewhere in the state, but it still does require some management to achieve sustainability according to the plan that was adopted earlier this year. So I hope that you see that there is some benefit to the work they're doing for everyone out there and that there is value. The right side of the chart obviously is the bad news, that in order to fund these operations, we need to charge either groundwater users or everyone in the basin or some hybrid method. And again, the rates, I'll just run down the low end of the rates. The regulatory fee would be $100, $120 per acre foot per year. The wellhead fee, which we're no longer considering. The parcel tax is about $60 per parcel per year. The benefit assessment would be $90 per acre foot per year, and the hybrid is in the $66 range, plus a parcel charge to go along with that. So that's a summary of all that you've heard over the last hour. I'm going to hand it back to Tim to go to the question portion. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, Jerry. That was a lot of information and very well articulated. I appreciate it. And we have some great questions to go through. So I think we'll just start at the top of the list. There may be some areas that we may want to have Marcus jump in, but let's just start. So the first question starts with a comment, which is always nice to hear, a comment like this. Thanks, Sonoma Valley GSA, for the excellent work and getting your fiscal house in order. Question or comment number one is, my inquiry concerns incentivizing lower water use under the fee-based approach by providing options for monitoring groundwater extraction by the smaller user in lieu of a set fee. And so maybe you could comment on the possibility of doing that.
Well, that kind of bridges between Marcus's area and my area too. I think doing work in lieu of fee is something that could be considered. We do have, most of these fee structures do have proportionality requirements, and we have to be mindful of that we can't charge less for one group and have the other group pay more to cover it. But I'll ask Marcus if he thinks there's any opportunity for the small users to maybe do some of the monitoring work for you or pitch in for a reduced rate.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the topic of a couple of questions that popped up, and certainly having measured and metered and reported data would certainly be helpful for the GSA, as well as help incentivize conservation. You can't really manage or understand what you don't know, and so having a meter and having a way to document conservation programs is something that would be helpful, and that is one of the potential policy options that the GSA will be considering in the future. Unfortunately, right now we don't have that type of infrastructure set up where it could be incorporated right off the bat. But it is something that I think could be further developed, depending upon the direction of this that this fee study goes. If it is based on extraction, that is something that could be considered and incorporated in the future.
And Tim, I would add to that, this other than the two fee structures that require voter approval, all the other fee structures considered, the board has flexibility on a year-by-year basis to modify that. A major modification would require some more, maybe another fee study update. But the fee study we plan to deliver will be quite durable through a lot of different options that they would have. So if they were to develop some sort of in lieu program in the coming year or two, they could build that into the next fee level that they would adopt for the next year or the next year. Our goal is to have the fee level across all 5 years, but they do have the flexibility to make some adjustments to that, especially if it'll help the common cause moving forward.
Thanks, Jerry. There was a second part to this first question, and that is the groundwater model sensitive enough to identify those that are using excess groundwater beyond assumed extraction? So it sounds like that might be a question for Marcus.
Actually, it kind of falls on my side
Oh,
because
okay.
as good guess, Tim. But the answer is no. It's not that sensitive because we're modeling the demand that a parcel uses based on how you're using the land. So if you over pump and let water spill or waste or get evaporated, that's not taken into account because the information we have is we know what you're growing across how many acres and what a typical use of water is. So without actual meter data on the pumps, we have no way to react to over pumping or under pumping. So it is sort of a we have to do kind of a one size fits all for all these different categories. So there's 10 sizes fit 10 feet, but it's not going to be sensitive to conservation per se or wastefulness. The conservation programs in the projects and actions will be moving forward, and those will stand on their own. So we do hope to be able to have some conservation. Unfortunately, the rate structure with the bounds that we're living in and the limited data just can't not be sensitive to that.
Okay, great. Thanks. There's another comment regarding this voluntary monitoring and reporting use in lieu of estimated use. And just the comment is there seems to be no incentives for saving on groundwater usage. Maybe you could comment on that, Jerry. It seems like maybe the fee is an incentive, but that's just my spin. So go ahead.
Yeah, actually, I will amend my earlier answer just a little bit to say that we do intend to bring forward, just as they did in the Santa Rosa Plain, with any fee that's adopted, whether it's this year or next, an appeals process. So if you can have good demonstrable data to show that you're using less than we've allocated your parcel, there should be a process available for you to go through and show that to the agency and get a reduction. So it's a little bit of an effort, and it's on people who come forward. So it's not something we can do systematically, but for farmers who use a way less water than the industry average or have different sources that we're not aware of, there should be a process where they can come through and make an appeal and hopefully get an adjustment to that. So to that extent, yes, there would be some incentives to use less. And we realize going forward that we may hear from several people who think they're being overcharged based on the water they actually use. And if they have data, we can probably get that adjusted. We won't hear from people who are being undercharged. They'll just let it ride. So it's kind of a one-way street. We acknowledge that going in. But I think to that extent, not without some effort on each individual property owner's part, I think there is a way to do that.
Okay, great. Thanks. This is a comment, but it probably could use some commentary. If budget is cut, a natural mitigation would be increased conservation. Demand management, i.e. if funds for projects and management actions and data collection are limited, to meet Sigma, the GSA can double down on conservation. Maybe a little feedback on that in terms of the overall end objective of the Groundwater Sustainability Plan and the state mandate is to have sustainable groundwater.
I'll throw it to Marcus for that. I think that's more of a compliance issue.
Yeah, I'd agree with what you said there, Tim, but I would point out, that developing a conservation program, there are costs associated with that as well, in terms of having a means to provide incentives for folks to conserve, having a way to document those conservation practices. So that there certainly is funding that would be needed for those types of programs. But yeah, I think the point there is well taken in terms of priority. And again, it's really going to be up to the GSA board to balance, the types of projects and actions that are prioritized for the basin.
But Marcus, if to cut back on the monitoring and reporting, doesn't that kind of shoot you in the foot for when you need to update your 5-year plan and your modeling?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of budget cutbacks, there are certain items that would be needed to be continued that are essentially required by SGMA, and so the majority of the monitoring and reporting that's included in the projected budget would need to continue because annual reports are required by DWR to remain in compliance with SGMA.
Right. Okay. So this goes back to another question. This goes back to some comments I think you made earlier, Jerry, but it's probably good to clarify again. Is there any possibility to change fee structure at some point? For example, begin with a regulatory fee now just to get started collecting the fees, then attempt to pass the parcel tax option at a later proper or appropriate time?
Yes, that is definitely an option that could be considered. As I mentioned before, the board has a lot of flexibility right up until the point where it's the voters will, and then it gets a little more rigid, but they definitely have that option.
Here's a comment on the hybrid option. The hybrid option seems like it is not proportional. It does charge some less and have others pay for it. What limits are there on proportionality?
Well, that's a good question and an astute observation. As I said, we still have some analysis to do to vet this and make sure it will meet legal muster, especially if we're doing it as a fee without voter approval. It will come under scrutiny at some point anyway. So we do have to do a little more analysis and make sure we can back up our estimates of how to split the budget. But this is not unheard of. Most water rates that you pay to your water district or the city has 2 charges just like this. There's a fixed fee for some of your fixed costs that have to be paid no matter how much water is produced or delivered. And then there's a commodity charge for the amount of water. And that's always a balance that every agency deals with on its own. And it has stood legal muster as far as being proportionate. So it is true that some costs need to be incurred regardless of how much water is pumped out of the ground, or in the case of water district, how much is produced and sold to customers. And that could be the flat rate that's applied to all. So I think there is a innate proportionality to it. It's a little different version instead of just commodity charges or estimated commodity in our case. So I think there's a case that can be made either way.
Okay, and it looks like we've got one that may be, oh, here's another one popped up. Thank you, Tom. It seems like most of the startup budget is allocated to G&A outreach, monitoring, reported. Only $148,000 for programs and activities that would actually reduce groundwater consumption. Do you expect this light item's relative share of the budget to grow over time? I assume you mean programs and activities.
Yeah, I'll ask Marcus to weigh in on how these line items will fluctuate over time. I have some ideas, but I think he's more the expert on that.
Yeah, I would say that the funding that's included in the 5-year budget for projects and management actions at this stage is primarily for assessing the feasibility and further scoping and planning for those projects and actions. I will note that there are other funding sources that will be pursued for implementation and funding some of the capital projects as part of the program, and that grant that the Valley of the Moon Water District recently received for implementing aquifer storage and recovery is one example of projects that are in the plan, kind of getting a little head start on funding. But in the future, I would expect that yes, some of the costs associated with data gap filling would hopefully be going down as we start to fill those data gaps and meet DWR's requirements on making sure we have the information needed to define and achieve sustainability. So the cost of projects and actions would likely increase over time. I would say specific projects that are in the future could be conducted in certain areas that the GSA may fund. They would likely have a separate fee study that might be a little different, that's more focused on benefits of those projects to users that benefit.
Okay, thanks, Marcus. And I guess I saw you were typing an answer to this one, but we might as well do it online. Would all pastures be charged the same rate regardless whether they are dry farmed or irrigated?
Yeah, so I was just responding to that comment. I'll send it after I respond here. But yeah, no, the data that we're using to map land uses in the basin is some detailed land use mapping that was done by the California State Department of Water Resources, and in some of those land use mappings, they indicated whether or not parcels were irrigated or not. In addition, we worked with the advisory committee during development of the Groundwater Sustainability Plan to kind of further refine some of the information on pasture irrigation. And so, yeah, only pastures that are flagged as being irrigated with groundwater would be charged under this scenario, not dry farmed or non-irrigated pastures, as long as that's what we have in our database based on the best available information that we have.
Okay, great. Well, I think that takes care of all the questions. They've either been answered verbally or they've been answered in writing online. So with that, I'm going to turn to Chair Gorn and ask if she would like to make any closing remarks.
Thank you, Tim, Marcus, Anne, and Jerry, everyone involved in the meeting tonight. And I really need to thank so many of our advisory board members who are with us tonight. And David, I just saw you turn on your video. Thank you to a GSA board member, and he serves as the chair of the Petaluma Valley GSA. We are the dynamic duo in both of those basins. So thank you for taking some time tonight to be with us. We really appreciate your questions and your information going forward. Just want to assure you that the board is listening to all of your questions and comments, and we may have echoed those comments even before this. We're very concerned about the fees that may potentially be charged, trying to find what is fair, what is right, and really focusing on how we reduce the budget so that we don't have to charge as many of the fees as possible. So David, I don't know if you want to comment at all, anything that you want to add?
Just to say thank you again to all the great staff work. This is a dilemma. This is a mandate that was sent down by Sacramento that we need to figure out a way to pay for. And I know in Sonoma Valley, you're a little bit ahead of the curve in terms of having some experience already in dealing with the groundwater basin. Here in Petaluma, it's a little different as well. And I saw a note in there. I'm sure that it was answered. Petaluma, it's a math problem here, a little more severe because there's less wells and less water usage and less parcels, and therefore, but fixed costs. So that's what we're trying to work through. And I do appreciate all the staff work and your leadership on this as well.
Thank you. And we do know of the three basins, the Santa Rosa Basin has more users And so their fees may tend to be lower. Sonoma Valley has significant groundwater declines, so obviously we need to work on the programs to reverse some of that or stay that decline. Petaluma Valley seems to be holding its own, but still we are required to administer and monitor the wells there. So thanks again, everyone, for taking your time tonight to be with us. There will be more conversation in the future, and so we'll bid you all a good night.
Great. Thank you, Chair Gorn and board members. And just one comment, this information will be shared with the rest of the GSA board, and the meeting presentation and summary will be posted on the website next week. With that, good night.
Thank you.